Excited to talk today about the safe AI opportunity for any speaker to overcome one of the biggest challenges when presenting complex information. And I say safe because it's not using the way AI most people have been. The problem with AI and sharing complex information is it too often gets something wrong. It sounds good. We all know it's good. It's sounding good, but it's often not right. And we can't afford to be wrong. So before I get into the opportunity, we have to talk about the challenge. What exactly is one of the biggest challenges facing speakers when they share complex information? And it's this: how do you figure out ahead of time what it is that people will understand when you speak? It's a seemingly impossible task. And it's one of the things I've been working on figuring out over the last 10 years of my work with researchers. And figuring this out was a two-step process. The first step was me just getting good at it. So one of the services I can offer people is help people understand, help people gain insight into what it is that people will hear when they speak. And I just know this because I've worked on thousands of talks and I've listened to people talk about talks after the talk. And through that process of working on thousands of talks, I've figured it out. But I knew I had to make it so other people could figure this out too. And that I figured out through a peer feedback model that I use in my class, that I use in the course that I teach, that I use in the digital program that I've built. And the peer feedback goes something like this. When you're done speaking with a practice audience, you let the practice audience talk with each other about what you said, but you're not allowed to say anything. That's right. You let them talk about what you said, but you don't correct them. They don't give you advice. They simply talk with each other about what you said. And that's how you gain insight about what they heard. It works brilliantly. It works brilliantly. But it's dependent upon having an audience. It's dependent on having people are representative of the audience you'll be speaking to available before you talk and to do this exercise, to give you this feedback. I call this feedback. It's really not feedback. It's really what it is when you're speaking, you're on this side of the table, right? You're talking to someone, you're talking to the audience there. And what we need to know, this is the problem part. What we need to know is, what is it that they hear? What is it that they understand? What is it that they will tell someone else about what we told them? Simply put, what is the story that they will tell about the story that you told? You do a talk. What is it that people will then remember? What is it that they understand? And if we don't figure this out before we do a presentation, before we do our talk, then really we're working blind. We have good insight if we've done this before and we predict and we do the best we can, but now we can do better. AI has provided the opportunity for us to do better. So I'm going to show you what I've done. I'm going to show you an app that I've built that does this. And you can do one of two things. Either you can work with the app that I've built. It's not expensive. Or you can build your own. You can try and prompt AI to do this. It's not as easy as it looks. But you can do the prompting. But here's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get an understanding about what people will say about the talk that you plan to give. Here's what I've done. Let me show it to you. It's really cool. Let me show it to you. I've put into this Mark Carney's Davos speech from a month or so back, okay? So what you see here is his speech. It's in here, okay? And then what I've done is I've put in the three personas that I want feedback, the three people in the audience that I want to, that are representative of the people who will be in the audience. One is what we call a field expert, okay? If you're an academic, this is someone within your own discipline, okay? And I put in some government official from outside of Canada. So that was the first one. And then the second one, Let me check that box again. The second one I put in an economist, and the third one, the default is an educated outsider. I've already programmed that one. Actually programmed all three to learn from what you put in. Okay. So then here's what you do. You put that in. You then put in the type of feedback you want. You analyze the transcript. Okay. You don't need to do any prompting. That's the only prompting you need is those two. You hit generate AI feedback, and it takes a minute to do this. So I've already done it ahead of time, and here's the one I've got. Okay. If you're familiar with the speech, Carney's basic argument was about rules-based international order being essentially a fiction we've all been politely maintaining. So that's from the field expert, right? And then you get to this. What struck me was the sheer volume of deals he rattled off: EU partnership, something with China and Qatar just concluded, free trade. I also noticed essentially rebranding Canada foreign policy as value-based realism. So this is what someone might say about what he said. Okay, and then what it also does is it gives an alternate opinion. What do I think, this being the persona here, what do I think someone else in the audience might say about this talk? Honestly, I think a colleague focused on trade architecture would have walked away hearing something different, fundamentally a pitch for Canada. So those are government folks, adjacent expert, the economist, right? Essentially about collective action problems, thinking this was less about economics and more about identity politics on a global scale. And then an educated outsider. So what this starts to do is this starts to help you understand what is it that people will hear, what it is it that people will understand, what is it that people will remember, what is it that they will tell someone else about what you said. And then you can go back and you can rework on your script, you can rejig, you can think about how did they get there? Why did they focus on that? And then you can shift what you're saying so that what they're saying, basically what you want to do is you want to get to the point that what they're saying, you're happy with what they're saying. You're like, oh yeah, if they took that away from my talk, I'd be happy with that. I'd be good with that. That's the problem. We don't know ahead of time, but AI can help get us there. AI can help us do this work, and we're not dependent on having a peer group. We're not dependent on other humans to give us feedback. We still should do that. I don't recommend not doing that. But this gives us another way, and it gives us a way to access the people who have the kinds of characteristics, the kind of background, the kind of values that we think will be in the audience. Okay? And then there's another thing this does. This is really cool too. It gives us 3 questions. Okay. And it not only gives us 3 questions, but it also gives us some insight behind the question. So let me go to the adjacent expert here for a second. Classic club goods problem in economics. I didn't hear anything about enforcement mechanisms or burden sharing formulas. This is the reason behind the question, right? So we not only get the question, but we get some of the thought behind why people ask that question. You can tell I'm excited about this. I really am, because I think this is exactly the kind of feedback that as speakers, as presenters of complex information with highly intelligent audiences, this is the kind of insight, this is the kind of information we need before we, this is the kind of information we need before we talk, not after, but before. And historically, it's been very difficult to get, right? Very difficult to get. So I want to do another one, and this one is more of a research talk. It's actually a TED talk, but it's a TED talk. This guy Nikolai Begg. It's a TED talk by an engineer who's talking about a very technical puncture actuation system. If you've never seen it, it's a brilliant example of how to make an engineering talk accessible to a broader audience. I love it for that reason. But it provides a really interesting case study for this. It's one of the ones I used to program this app. Okay. So this app, we did the same thing. I plugged it in, and then I put in engineer, and then as the adjacent expert, I put in actually medical device developer. Okay. And actually I already did this with one. We'll let this one run, and then maybe we'll come back to it in a second. Again, it takes a minute. You can see it. You see it spinning here? Nope, we have to hit generate AI feedback. Now you see it spinning. So rather than wait for it to spin, we'll go over to this one. The field expert was an engineer. I gave a talk about puncture injuries and surgery. Who programmed it to be kind of informal this way, right? What got me was the mechanism design itself, using the tissue's reaction force, hold the lock in place, having same force, disappearance, trigger release. Genuinely clever, clean use of Newton's third laws, both problem statement and solution architecture. You get the idea here. And then again, there's some questions, and there's some reason behind the question, which I think is a really interesting kind of second, third layer of insight. And then let's go this one. I put an angel investor, right? So if anybody's, if you're in the research space, if you're trying to do a startup, what is it that an angel investor will ask me? Here's a way to start getting some insight into that. So if you file patents, what's the regulatory pathway? Who's already in this space? Typical questions, and some of the reasons behind those questions. Okay. So for people talking to an audience that they're unfamiliar, if you're familiar with the audience, you might be able to anticipate these questions. But if you're not familiar with the audience, this is a great way to anticipate some of the questions that they'll have. And then let's go back to the one we did just a moment ago. So this one is now processed. You see the little green check marks. And then has the device actually been used? That's an outsider. What was the medical developer? What did they ask? Have you started the 501 pathway? Have you force feedback, tactile confirmation for the surgeon? So that's a really interesting one, right? Have you thought about the person who's actually using it? Sterilization to the locking mechanism. As you can see, these are not easy questions. This is not like, okay, we're throwing up softballs here. And there's another app, actually. We're getting a little bit. So let's see what happens to this. So we export this to a PDF. You can download it. And then when you close this section, and if we were to go back and look at our history, we could pull that session back up. We can view it. That's the one we were just doing. And then if we go, and some of you might be wondering about privacy, if you go and you look at the transcript, you'll notice it's deleted. It's gone. The only thing kept in the system is the answers, the questions that were generated, the analysis that was done. You can go look at that later, but the transcript itself is analyzed in memory and then deleted from memory. That's one of the security features of this. It's also encrypted in our servers. We can't access it. You're the only one who can access it. It's a HIPAA compliant site. So if you have information that you're worried about, if you have proprietary information, we think we've set up the site in a pretty safe way to be able to do that. But let's look at the Q&A that came up. And just before we leave here, I'll just show you that. I'll do another video sometime on the Q&A practice. That's pretty interesting. You do the same thing, and then you get these questions, and you answer these questions with a timer out loud, recorded, and then they're printed out on a PDF, and you can go back and look at them later. So if you want to use this as Q&A practice, you can use this same app system as Q&A practice. But this really isn't about the app. What this is really about is presenting more effectively, presenting complex information. I work with researchers who that's what they do. We present complex information, and we're constantly dealing with this problem that we don't know what people are going to understand until we try it and practice with them and ask them. So we go to a research conference, or we go to a group beyond academia that we haven't presented to before. We're kind of running things. It's kind of a pilot study every time, right? This is the reason like advertisers use focus groups, because they want this information. They want to know how people will respond to it before they hear it. This isn't about advertising, but it is about understanding your audience. It is about getting out of that speaker chair into that audience chair and into the mind of the person who's listening to you talk before you step on stage, before you step behind the podium. And that's one of the keys to becoming an effective presenter. One of the keys to becoming an effective presenter is understanding your audience and understanding what your audience will hear, understanding how your audience will feel, understanding what your audience will remember, understanding what your audience will say to someone else about what you said. And AI is giving us a way to do this quickly and easily and not being dependent on a whole bunch of other people in order to get it done.